I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
We've got the same dad.
But we didn't meet until I was 16. No! We didn't meet until you were 16. And I was a lot.
And you were already an old codger.
I was an old codger with no memory.
But younger than I am today. However, we're still catching up and making up for lost time. And this
is therefore the podcast where we share an album that your
brother
should know. Brilliant.
Welcome, everybody. Today, I'm going to dive straight in. I'm very, very excited, perhaps more excited than I've been about any podcast we've done thus far, to be talking about an album which I frankly can't get enough of, A Bigger Bang.
Boom!
By the Rolling Stones. Obviously a personal favourite of mine, which is why I'm suggesting it. Dave, I know you know who the Rolling Stones are, and I know you actually enjoy their music. But my first question to you is, when was the last Rolling Stones album that you know and like released?
Yeah, so like the rest of the world, at least the rest of the world if you're a, middle-aged bloke, Rolling Stones, love them, love the early stuff. My favourite two albums, like the rest of the world, would be Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. I then fell off the cliff. I think I've got Love You Live on CD somewhere. That's atrocious. And I heard Steel Wheel once, and that was enough. And I fess up, because of this podcast, I have listened to Some Girls.
And what are your preconceptions in that case of 21st century Rolling Stones?
Well, obviously, what I do know is that every album since Some Girls has been released as this is the new Exile on Main Street. And so my hope was that it was more in that direction than the sort of, the snippets I'd heard on the radio of this kind of, middle of the road 90s. We're trying to be quite poppy commercial Stones. That was my fear, just to kind of sort of, that cliche of we've just turned into a cliche of ourselves stuff. I was expecting to be underwhelmed, let's put it that way.
Well, I cannot wait to hear how much you enjoyed this music, but I need to build up. So for context, I need to point out that the reason we're discussing this album is because at this moment, we are 2 days, 10 hours, and 37 minutes away from the release of Hackney Diamonds. And as Dave pointed out, I feel like every time the Stones fart out a new release, it is monumentally hailed as a masterpiece. And the hype that has surrounded this project and the existence of this music, ever since the first notes of the lead single and opening track, Angry, have been monumental. And frankly, I've struggled to get on board. I find Angry a little bit of a two-chord. Whatever. It sounds fine. It sounds like the Stones. It sounds like you'd hope. But we've been waiting 18 years since A Bigger Bang for new music. That was a long time to wait for what's so far been very little. However, meanwhile, will go on record and argue that before we started preparing for this podcast, I've been telling people for the last 18 years that A Bigger Bang is the best thing the Stones have done since Some Girls in 1978, widely held up as their last significant work. Revisiting this album, I feared would let me down, and despite some teething problems, I am now actually utterly convinced it's the best thing they've done since Exile on Main Street in 1972.
Wow.
Hang me out with a noose. I don't care what you think. I'm a big Stones fan. I also can see through some of the flaws of the intervening albums, but for me, A Bigger Bang encapsulates everything that's fun, youthful, hooky, raw, real, rootsy. It's rock and roll distilled at its very, very core, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic album. And I'm
don't hold back there, Rob. Tell us what you really feel.
and I want to hear what you think, Dave.
Okay. Well, the good news is I loved it. I had a great time listening.
Yes!
Yay! But I knew I shouldn't. I mean, golly, those flaws. I mean, it felt dirty. I felt unclean, but I had a great time because it's musically, musically they haven't evolved since Exile on Main Street. Well, that's fine because no one does rock and roll like the Rolling Stones, right? They've still got it on this album. It's dirty and it's simple and it's great and it does all the things that rock and roll's supposed to do. So that's brilliant.
So for once, do believe the hype.
Do believe the hype. I believe you when you say it's the best album since Exile on Main Street. I guess the question is how much of
I mean, that's controversial.
Is it? So I certainly enjoyed it more than Some Girls. I'll give it that. So I don't know what other albums in the intervening period would be held up as
I do actually have a huge amount of time for Goat's Head Soup. It's only rock and roll, and especially Black and Blue. So I'm probably playing a bit loose and fast, but I do definitely maintain that this is their strongest works to Some Girls. And yeah, as you mentioned earlier, every single thing they've done basically since I think Undercover in 1983. You know, we had Steel Wheels coming out in '89, Return to Form, enjoyable, not amazing. Voodoo Lounge 1995, which I would say is up there. It's not in the same league as a Bigger Bang, but it's inching close. I think we can all agree Bridges to Babylon was a little bit confused. There were so many producers involved, there were so many aspirations. There was a desperate groping at the zeitgeist, which worked at times and didn't at others. And that's really been it. So we're looking at, in the last, do the maths, Rob, 34 years, no more than 5 albums, counting the new one. So yeah, this one really stands out to me as having something real, something primal, and something it's a real aberration. If the Rolling Stones had made some wonderful records in the 70s and then spent the next 40 years trying to keep up, I would kind of forgive them at this point. But as you say, this holds up better than Some Girls, and I'm amazed you feel the same. So given that I've lived with this album for 18 years and you've lived with it for less than 18 days, what was it that sold you, and were there any tracks that kind of jumped out at you?
Well, so there's a lot of consistency. And that's why it does remind you of Exile on Main Street, because there's quite a lot of banger after banger. Certainly the first 3 tracks, Rough Justice, Let Me Down Slow, It Won't Take Long. That's just Rolling Stones writ large. They could have been early 70s Stones. They're all great. So I loved all that. She Saw Me Coming. That's fantastic.
Yes.
And even the ballads, Biggest Mistake is really sweet and lovely. So that's really great. And then Laugh I Nearly Died, I think is a really important song on the album. But to tell you about that, I have to go on a bit of a story rant about me and this album. Shall I do that now?
By all means, can't wait to hear.
Okay, so I was enjoying this album so much, but feeling a bit dirty because and let's get some of these things out of the way. I mean, I think Mick Jagger was 60 when he was writing this, 61 or something, the lyrics to this. And, the first 11 albums songs are basically, they're all about women, right? And women on this album not even...
They get pretty short shrift, should we say.
It's one-dimensional. I mean, in Mick Jagger's world, women are either sort of vixeny, vampy, and not to be trusted, but he can't help himself, that kind of dirty girl thing, or they're sweet and lovely, and he's blown it and he's broken-hearted. That's your 2 Mick Jagger positions there. And so women are either good, but I lost them, or bad, so I don't care. But hey, I've probably had a good sexy time in the meantime. That's where you're at. So this is not the place to look for kind of, considered, detailed reflections on the nature of relationships, which for a 60-year-old man, you could either go, well, have you had any mature, committed relationships where you've learned some things about yourself and somebody else? Or have you just...
Not if you've become the front man of the world's archetypal rock band, probably in your late teens.
Yeah, exactly. So you probably have only just shagged your way around the world and you see women, and it is, it does feel tingy... There's some really misogynistic moments which we'll come on to lyrically, but
Sure.
as a blanket, women are very one-dimensional. So I was, but it's rock and roll, and that's part of the nature of rock and roll as well. So I was enjoying the album, and I came to the view as to how a mindset to get into the album. Okay, so run me with this one. Has this ever happened to you? It's happened to me a couple of times. Imagine a scene. You've gone out on a Friday or Saturday night. It's a quiet weekend for you. You were just going to go out and do some shopping, get a nice meal, go home and ring your mother, that kind of thing. Like you're not having a big weekend sort of thing. And you go to the pub, you think, I'll have a pint and then I'll go home and watch something improving on the telly and maybe do my ironing, that kind of thing. And what happens is...
On a Friday?
Friday or Saturday night. I don't know. It's a quiet one for some reason. You've got loads to do at home.
Sounds more like a Tuesday to me.
But yeah, actually probably even better. It's a Tuesday night. You should be going home because you've got work in the morning. In the pub, you bump into these 4 lads. And I say lads, even though they're older than you, harder than you, cooler than you. But there they are. They are on one. They are large in it, right? And there's a particular figure, Mick, He's charismatic, and the whole pub's drawn to him because he's telling story after story about these women that he's been with or lost or been with but wanted to lose. And it's just, and then you know them vaguely through a friend or something. The Mick catches your eye and you end up part of that circle, right? They've drawn you in. You're one of the gang. Suddenly you're going to have a quiet night, but then like an hour later, you're 3 pints down and there's something in the back of your mind goes, this is bad and wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. I should be going home and do my ironing, but I've just sacked off. I'm sacking off the night and I'm going to ring in sick tomorrow, Wednesday for work because I'm having such a good time, even though I shouldn't do it. And I'm a little bit scared, but I'm having a great time and I'm in it now. And that is how now when I listen to the album, I can picture the pub I'm in and I'm like, it's a lost weekend or lost night out with the lads who I don't know, but I'm enjoying their company. I know that I'm not going to be mates for life because I'm just not that cool and hard. But for that one night, I'm with the gang and I'm having a great time, right? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, a huge amount of sense. And I at this point in my life, I guess I don't sit down or rather walk around and listen to the Rolling Stones a great deal because it does feel like a guilty pleasure. It does feel like there's more improving things to be listening to than revisiting late Stones.
Musically and conceptually.
And that's why I've really and that's why I've really enjoyed this process and found that it's not quite as good as I remember it, but it's about 85% as good as I remember it. And I think the reason I really bonded this album is because it came out at probably the time where I was going, came out in early 2005, I think. So I was probably in second year of university. Right. I had one of those little Sony like Walkman phones where you could fit like 120 songs on it or something. So I would have had this album and a few other albums, and I'd be just wandering around Nottingham, probably half pissed the whole time, playing these bangers.
Yeah.
And I somehow managed to get my entire friend group hooked on the Stones.
Wow.
And we were they were our favorite band. We listened to the Stones all the time. And actually, my student life kind of, you could say the consummation of that arc, if you will, is to graduate. We couldn't get tickets for Wembley, so we got cheap tickets for Paris, got the Eurostar, and obviously stayed up all night after the gig, seeing the Stones on this tour, towards the end of this tour, so in 2007. Wow. At that point, I think it was the biggest tour in history. So yeah, to me, this music all really does speak from a very laddish, beer-soaked kind of era.
Yeah. Yeah, which brings us to Laugh I Nearly Died, okay? So I think that's a really important song on this album because all the rest of what's gone on before that is these very one-dimensional depictions of women where Mick himself, he's just this larger-than-life figure, no soul at all. There's nothing about the internal workings of his mind or soul going on.
I mean... he's taken you down the streets of love already, Dave. That was a pretty harrowing journey. He's told you about the biggest mistake of his life.
Yeah, but it's all a bit like, that was a big mistake, but next, not you again,
He's been caught red-handed, I presume, in She Saw Me Coming. He's really... He's had some go wrap around the back of his hand. He's been served his dose of rough justice. You have really had... explored the inner psyche of a very nuanced, complicated man.
Yeah, and he's such a victim.
And his very, very deeply personal connection to the female gender.
Indeed. And it might just be, but actually Laugh I Nearly Died, I actually found really affecting. I actually thought, and that's where I got to the kind of, in my pub concept, I actually felt, God, you know what? In that night out, there's a moment where Mick suddenly got serious and suddenly the sort of facade goes and you kind of, in that song, it's almost you could convince yourself saying, yeah, all of that before was a front. And track 12, Laugh I Nearly Died, I found that really honest and Long Night of the Soul-y. And I didn't find it as plastic, or not plastic because it's quite real music, but not as facile. I actually felt he really meant it. And it puts, if it wasn't for that song, the rest, all the stuff that's gone before about would be more unpalatable. But I Laugh I Nearly Died is a real emotional moment, and I thought it was great that it was there. And then what I loved was, and this is in my mythical night out with these lads, that
he goes on a political run.
Yeah,
next,
no, exactly.
After
so what's
opening
happening?
up, he has to. He's shared he's bought his soul to the world. Now he has to suddenly point the finger out at somebody else and blame and become macho
exactly
again.
That.
So
it's all got a little bit too serious, and everyone's like, oh, it's a quiet moment. So Mick's gone,
Oh, that guy in the White House.
Politics, right? Yeah, well, fucking in it. And it just gets to politics. We get off women and we go on to politics.
George fucking
Bush.
Bush.
In a really, even, if his depictions of his relationships with women is one-dimensional, it doesn't get much more one-dimensional than the lyrics to Neo-Con.
Yeah. And dear listeners, assuming you don't know the ins and outs of this seminal work as well as us, the next track, Sweet Neocon, is, I think, a pretty heavy-handed, very unnuanced attack on George Bush.
Yeah, my favorite clunky verse is, I'm frightened at my wits. This bomb was in my bedroom. Yeah, and it's giving me the shits. It's interesting. It's proper, and it's proper tongue in the teeth, thoughtful, thinking out the rhyme there. Brilliant.
It is interesting though, because it does seem like a lot of musicians of all genres, but especially aging rockers, after September 11th, they all felt obliged to kind of say something. Obviously you had "Let's Roll" by Neil, which we don't really want to talk about.
No,
we don't. Then you went back the other way when they started, attacking I think Bush Leaguer by Pearl Jam from 2003, right. And it's like it was quite in vogue to try and say something political about these really strange times we were living through. Whereas now we're living through far stranger times, and I don't feel that music's often addressing it as. Let's say I doubt there's a song about the environment on Hackney Diamonds, but perhaps I'll be proved wrong.
Find out. As a ride in a pub, sort of almost finishing off with a soulful moment, Laugh I Nearly Died, and then we get to politics. And then, and honestly, Rob, I was thinking this, God, I think I'm just in a pub with these guys. And then track 14, looks what the cat dragged in. It was like, oh my God, it is a concept album. It's the story of going out to the pub and all this happening. And then you do go home and it's look what the cat dragged in. You've looked in the mirror and gone, oh my God, what did I do? And driving too fast. Yeah.
That's so interesting because, so he's looking at the tragedy, that's facing yourself, and then driving too fast. It's just, to me, that's driving home.
Yeah.
And then Infamy is like, I've got it in for me. I did it all to myself. Yeah, it is. You could read it this way. I think it's probably not intended.
I'm sure it's not. But
my reading on Look What the Cat Dragged In is, it's probably the most misogynistic moment on the record, isn't it? I love the beginning of the chorus where it's like, I won't interrogate you and I won't berate you about your lifestyle. And then he succeeds. Then the rest of the chorus, he proceeds to interrogate and berate. It's like, but where you been? I won't interrogate you. I won't berate you. But where you been? which
it's fine. What have you been doing? Brilliant.
You look like a cover of Sergeant Pepper. It's like, that sounds like berating someone to me.
A little bit. Yeah.
But I actually think. I've got lots of things I love about this album, but I think for me, the 1-2 of Look What the Cat Dragged In and Driving Too Fast might be my favourite moment. And to have two unashamed bangers so close together is just really quite. I mean, it's amazing the album's got that many legs in it. I mean, there's some epic Keith riffs that just have that perfect sound of that big open G Telecaster, that slightly lazy around the beat delivery. I mean, I think It Won't Take Long and She Saw Me Coming. They both have that kind of muted big open thing he does. It's based around two chords that he's been doing his whole life. But it sounds like nobody else. Like those two, especially.
And how do you play?
They floor me every time.
How do you play two chords and everyone knows it's you? Like that. That's just. But it's like, oh look, Keith. That's Keith. There we go. That's fantastic. Yeah.
I mean, I do think playing a Telecaster and open G tuning helps.
Fair enough.
But no. I think this is one of the reasons I do love this album, because I think it's a great guitar album, and we should talk a little bit about the music, because it was definitely a response to Bridges to Babylon,
right,
which came out 7 years earlier and did have this cast of producers on, including the Dust Brothers, i.e. the Chemical Brothers, I believe, right. and there were definitely moments, but this really was just written by Keith and Mick in a room, by all accounts. And actually,
and
if you look at the list of musicians involved, between them, Mick and Keith were actually playing bass on a bunch of songs, because they were just laying down these demos, and Mick's even playing drums on some of them.
I didn't know Mick could play bass and drums. Quite competently, actually.
I think to be fair, Charlie Watts, he went back and redid all the drums, but the point was they laid down these demos together with pretty much Mick playing drums and Keith playing his guitar, and them just coming up with these basic skeletal songs, and then adding a few bits here and there, but it does sound very much like a band in a room. There's 2 or 3 guitar parts, and then Charlie comes in as the drums. Ronnie Wood was only invited to play on 10 of the 16 songs.
I read that, and I'm like,
but having said that, he's played some of his best work on this record. I think the guitar tones and the production, it's very raw, it's very rootsy. They've got some great Fender twang in there. So I think, as someone who was probably just kind of mastering the nuances of that kind of classic rock sound at that moment in my life. In many ways, I think this is the best sounding Stones record in terms of consistency, at least. Of course, I think Sticky and Exile have real vibes to them, but this sounds live. This sounds raw. And it plays to all their strengths. The way they approach timing, that playing around with the groove, not quite in the pocket, that distinctly Stonesy swagger is so front and center because there really is nothing else. And that's what makes these very simple rock songs sound great. And I think, yeah, it's a guitarist album. And that's probably one of the reasons that I've adored it for so long.
I agree with a lot of what you said there. And just, the production is brilliant. And, Exile on Main Street, for me, the production has always just been a little bit muddy. Exile on Main Street.
Yeah, deliberately. But I mean, obviously that was famously recorded in Keith's chateau in the basement, right? And I presume they were overdubbing on primitive tape and kept,
But I could have always done with a little bit more clarity.
I find that lack of fidelity on Exile actually helps me enjoy it because you kind of imagine it's, you're almost hearing an audio verite document of these kind of hedonistic,
gotcha.
parties they were having at that time. You can to me, it really speaks for the record. Do you know? I'm sure you're a fan of.
Basically, we got pissed and stoned for a month in a room. And here's the result. Yeah, that's.
I think it was more like 6 months.
Okay,
yeah,
whatever.
I mean, they were exiles for a year, but yeah. No, I'm sure you're a fan of Sly and the Family Stone, and you know how that their most classic album. There's a riot going on. It's got a really, really muddy sound. Supposedly, it's because Sly. Yeah. I believe it was probably Electric Lady Studios or wherever it was. He would often go out clubbing and then invite the girls back with the promise that they were going to appear on his new record. So, of course, he'd come in to record some backing vocals and then obviously try and have his way with them. And, of course, he'd come the morning, or more likely the next evening, he'd delete the vocals and get another girl in. So that's supposedly why the fidelity on those... This could be one of those, Mojo magazine myths.
I know.
But supposedly that's the deal.
That is terrible.
And I love that.
That is terrible.
I love
that.
Wow.
But yeah, the production of Sticky Fingers is very crisp and clear. So this is almost like the vibe of Exile, but with the production of Sticky Fingers. I quite like that.
Yeah, and Sticky, I believe, was recorded in a few different places, right? Because definitely Brown Sugar and was it Wild Horses were recorded in Muscle Shoals when they were on tour, and then maybe Moonlight Mile. I think it comes from a few different sessions.
Sure.
So it's interesting, and that's one reason it doesn't sound too coherent in a good way because it's got different session musicians at different moments, and obviously there's extra strings overdubbed here. Sticky Fingers is quite operatic, but this strip's even that way. There's nobody else outside the band really on it. Obviously, you've got Dale Jones, their long-time bassist from Miles Davis's band, playing on the 10 songs that Mick and Keith don't do, and Chuck Leavell, who's been in the band since before Ian Stewart even died or left, I think. And then really, you've got a tiny bit of overdubbing on one song, and that's it really. Some vocals on two of us. So it really is just basically Mick and Keith and Charlie.
Yeah. And
knocking him out in the garage.
Yeah.
And Don was obviously overseeing it all, but I don't know how much he was really doing apart from saying, lads, should we focus a little bit? Should we finish that one?
Probably. Now, on that, if you're Ronnie Wood, how are you feeling? Because there's always this thing, just remind me, he joined the Stones.
So
For Some Girls?
I think he joined as a touring member in 1977.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, he was at the sessions for Black and Blue and probably even played on one or two songs because Mick Taylor left in 74.
Yeah.
The myth is he joined in 68 as a non-smoking vegetarian at the age of about 17 and left as a heroin addict 6 years later. That's the myth.
Yeah.
I've actually met Mick Taylor.
Check you out. Of course you have. Okay. How and where?
Backstage at Norwich.
That's less glamorous, but yeah. I thought you were going to say, the Hollywood Bowl or something, but Norwich Arts Centre.
Yeah. It wasn't Arts Centre and it wasn't the big one. It's the middle one.
Village Hall.
Backstage at Norwich Waterfront, where his band had one of his very rare solo appearances. And,
okay.
Yeah, but I shook his hands and congratulated him. But then they all went up for a pub meal and they didn't invite me, so I was a bit...
bastards. So Ronnie Wood, you've joined the biggest rock and roll band in the world, and you're sort of part of it, but you're sort of not. And you tour with them.
So Ronnie Wood joined in 77, but he was on the payroll until, I believe, the early noughties even.
Wow.
Definitely the late 90s. He was an employee for more than 20 years. I'm pretty sure of that.
Okay.
But I mean, he's never really had any decision-making powers.
No.
And I don't think he's written much, but if he had, they probably would have taken his name off it. That was one of Bill Wyman's big bugbears.
Yeah.
He reckons he wrote the riff to Miss You, which is very likely, as it's the bass line at least, which is the song. And he also reckons he wrote the riff to Jumping Jack Flash.
Oh, really? That's a bit bigger. Yeah.
Got any credit for it?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by Ronnie Wood and how he feels about, just being this kind of peripatetic member. Are you a member? He tours with them. They must get on. But at the same time, he's never properly in the gang. And this album seems to say, you're really not in the gang. We'll call you when we need a bit of something that Keith can't quite provide and a bit of Flash, but really.
I mean, I think he's a bit like you in that pub story earlier. I mean, I think he's just happy to be hanging out with Keith. He reveres Keith. Keith is a living legend. I mean, he's almost a member of the coolest band in the world, and
that's better than not being a member at all. Yeah.
He's had his own problems. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've both seen Ronnie Wood stumble around the stage of Bob Dylan for 90 minutes.
Yes.
And not know how
what
any of the songs.
Yeah.
And I think he checked into rehab shortly after that.
Right, okay.
In advance of going on tour for this record, because the word is he was given a condition he had to clean up to go on the Bigger Bang tour.
Right.
Or he wouldn't be on it. Keith was given no such condition.
Imagine you were in a world where the Rolling Stones tell you to clean up your act.
But having seen what we saw at Fleda Festival in 2004, whenever it was, I'm not too surprised because he did literally. I think he was invited on to play a song with Dylan, and he just stayed on stage.
He did. He wasn't going.
In fact, he didn't know any of the songs, and was just walking around, looking at the other guitarists, trying to figure it out.
But the sound engineer did not turn his guitar up. Let's put it that way. It was all silent, I think, what was coming out.
Whereas Keith can stagger around and somehow
it's brilliant.
Pull it off. So, apart from the slightly questionable lyrical content, which I will in no way excuse or I will in no way undermine, its problematic nature. What did you not like about this album?
Well, just two things I want to mention. One, but not just the lyrics in terms of the kind of. Can you even say borderline misogynistic? It's binary, isn't it? But actually, the other thing about the lyrics is there are some moments, and you forgive them because you're having such a good time, of just really, really, crunchy rhymes where he's thought too hard about it and he just wants to get the rhyme in. And I think my example, the favourite one's probably on the Streets of Love, where the lamps are lit, the moon is gone, I think I've crossed, the Rubicon! And it just, feels very, and then this one's both, you can't say that and a terrible rhyme as well in, oh no, not you again. Everybody's talking, showing off their wit. The moon is yellow, but I'm not jello, staring down your tits.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah.
I mean, A, it's terrible, and B, it's just an awful rhyme as well. So that there are some really, really awful rhymes where you just go, and I don't, his early work, he was better than that. There wasn't these crunchy rhymes.
And it does feel laboured, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's some really, the other one is on She Saw Me Coming. She must have tapped my phone. She saw me coming. I felt like I was cloned. What does that even mean? In the context of the song. It's just, he needs something that rhymes vaguely with phone, so he's gone, I felt like I was cloned, Anyway, but enough of that.
Or maybe they're not laboured, maybe he's knocking them out. I think the biggest example of that for me is Biggest Mistake, which I find kind of really, really clumsy, but also weirdly affecting.
Yeah.
Because you kind of think, how can you... The narrative is very much like, I think I had something great, I was drowning in love, and then I fucked it. And just having a chorus that goes, I think that I made the biggest mistake in my life. You're like, wow, groping for a universal hit much? I mean, you're just...
Yeah.
But weirdly, it's like, hold on. Nobody else would go there. No one would hit the nail
so
squarely on the head.
It is a cliche,
and
but
I
it
kind of
works.
think it does have some merit. And again, going back to those heady days of 2006 or whatever, or whenever I was really deep into this album when I should have been listening to the Klaxons or whatever.
Yeah.
A friend of mine did break up with his girlfriend and did listen to that song on repeat and say that it made him feel better. So,
there you go. It's making me feel good as well because, as we've discussed in previous conversations, I went to university to listen to Jethro Tull, which was really uncool. And there you were. I mean, this was not cool, right, when you were at uni. No. 60-year-old stone, men making music. This was not what you should have been into at that point at all.
But I found it really chimed with my lifestyle at that moment because, as you can see, it's a real celebration of having a good time.
Yeah.
It was a great walking around the neon nights kind of album.
Sure.
It was one you'd walk to. It was one that you'd listen to on the way to the pub. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So the other thing which we have to talk about, this place is empty. The obligatory Keith vocal in the middle of the album It's awful. And in my okay, so I'm going to posit that I think it's awful. In my pub analogy, it's fine.
It's
Mick's gone to the bar.
It's when the other guy.
Well, no, Mick's gone to the bar, or he's probably gone out the back to stick something up his nose. But he's gone.
No. Mick is neither buying the drinks. He's with the girls in the corner. He's wandered over to have a crack, and you're left with the kind of the drunk friend.
Yes, the drunk friend
who's finally getting a chance to talk.
I know, but he's not half as charismatic. He's not half as engaging. And in fact, Mick leaves, and there's this kind of that thing where the air goes out the room. It's just kind of, and there's a bit of an awkward silence because Mick's very much the glue, and suddenly you're left with this clunky bloke that's really pissed, going, "It's funny how things go around." But go around, they do. I mean, and that is such a clear, and it doesn't work. It's clunky. And it just mumbles his way through it. And there's that awful line, which I have to say, come on, bare your breasts and make me feel at home.
Oh, God.
What? How? Since when has that made anyone feel at home? I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't know. And I Googled it just to make sure it was when you Google it, Google lyrics come up. They've sanitized it and they've changed bare your breast to come on, bait your breath. And make me feel at home. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, but that's what it...
They've censored him.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
But that's what it actually said. Anyway, but I don't mind it because in the pub, Mick's gone off and this rambling, very drunk bloke is just going on, it's empty, breasts, empty, breasts. It's like Father Ted. And he just rambles on about it and it's soon over. And then, but what's brilliant is because Mick comes back, he can sense the mood and it's straight into, oh no, not you again. Banger. Yeah, just brilliant. Just goes straight into it. Fantastic. And we're back on the energy again. And Mick doesn't have another go until Infamy, which I also couldn't really get on with, I'm afraid, because, Infamy, the pun on infamy and in for me.
Well, I was about to say, no, in that narrative, let's play this out. So, Mick's had his, his bearing of the E minor soul or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he's gone into political run.
Yeah.
Then you're back at their place by now. Then his others come in and he started not berating her, but berating her.
Yeah, yeah.
Then he's gone off driving in his Jag, driving too fast.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably crashed in a ball of flames.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, the drunk one's still in the corner in Mick's house spouting conspiracy theories. Oh, they had it in for me all along.
But you are aware of Pompeii, aren't you?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so all right, so this is right. There was and it had, Frankie Howard. Frankie Howard was a famous comedian in the 70s, very, very funny, used a lot of puns. People my age and older, sorry, it is an age thing. Right, there was a famous scene in this set in Roman times sitcom where Frankie Howard in a toga comes in and says, as Julius Caesar, infamy, they've all got it in for me. Right, and it's like so famous. It's so famous in the 70s, and it hung over to me in the 80s. And so Keith must know it.
They stole it.
It was so famous. It's like they knew Derek and Clive. They knew this as well. It's so big. So this song is a direct, pun riff from that. And I don't find it a particularly interesting song either. So for all those reasons, I've finished on Driving Too Fast. I'm just stopping it at that point. I can live with that infamy, but there you go.
I would like to speak up in defense of perhaps not these two examples, though I do think Infamy is a pretty cool track. I love the kind of rising muted thing. Kiefer's had his moment on the mic.
Oh yeah, Happy's great off Exile.
Happy's great, but back on Beggar's Banquet we had Salt of the Earth.
Okay.
Raise a glass to the good working people. He's had his moments, and I really find his moments quite grounding. And I don't think This Place Is Empty doesn't stand out to me as being especially awful.
Okay.
I think Infamy has definitely got like a bit of a spark to it. Okay, granted, it's not as good as everything he's done, but on later albums, Keith's songs are often the strongest ones.
Okay.
I think probably his best ballad of all is Slipping Away, which may be the best song on Steel Wheels. And a little bit later, Voodoo Lounge, Through and Through. Mm-hmm. I think the last of an ultimate track. It's a real epic. It's used really, really well in The Sopranos, interestingly.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Keith's solo work is actually, if anything, I think as he's mellowed and his voice has got that sexy kind of
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and he is, of course, playing up the Pirates of the Caribbean persona a little bit, but he is a wizened old man. He's grown into that kind of hardened troubadour in the corner that he always wanted to be. So I don't have a problem with these two songs. I'm actually probably most interested to see what he's done on Hackney Diamonds of all the songs. I know he's got to sing at least one.
There will be a Keith song.
Okay, Dave, I've bored you enough about falling in love with this album when I was about 20. Having encountered it more than twice as old as I was when I first heard this album, where do you want to hear this album?
I'm just trying to work out the maths of that. Being more than twice as old as you were when you first heard this album. Good God, yeah. Oh, this is a secret guilty pleasure, most of it. It would be, you're about to go out music. It so is, isn't it? It's like, you're going to go out on a night out and you just stick this on while you're getting ready. It's that.
And what if you're not going out, but you're instead having people over to yours for your Sunday hipster dad barbecues? Is it going to make the playlist?
Well, some of it would, but I'd have to edit it. Probably not, Rainfall Down. Oh, Rainfall Down, one question. The riff on Rainfall Down, that it's pretty good, isn't it? But they love it quite a lot. That whole song is based around that one. And
it's basically an octave and then the high note goes
yeah.
down.
You almost want to say it's not that good a riff, lads. But anyway, that's another thing. So what would be on? There's loads that could go on a Hipster Dad barbecue. We look what the cat brought in. Driving Too Fast. Rough Justice. Oh no, not you again. Just some of the lyrics you'd have to edit. Not This Place Is Empty.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we need to tell anyone normally we close the episode with further listening. I hope everyone already knows the Rolling Stones. If you don't, of course, go and listen to Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street before you listen to this. But I would say there's one reason that I come back to this album more often than I go back to those albums, and that's because they do have such gravity and such gravitas that, I approach them with a different mindset, whereas this is, rather than seeing this as a masterpiece, I see this as a unique guilty pleasure that's I like to imagine only I am experiencing with such adolescent glee. And yeah, if you want to hear other late Stones, I would say Voodoo Lounge is the next one to hear.
Okay, that's good. Here's a question off the beaten track a little bit. What's your favourite pre-Sticky Fingers Stones album?
Well, I mean, it's got to be Beggar's Banquet or Let It Bleed, and I guess Beggar's Banquet because I like the general acoustic vibe. I think it kind of stands out as something quite unique in their catalogue.
Okay.
But I mean, that's the run of four, isn't it? That is the classic. That's the imperial phrase, Beggar's Banquet through Exile.
Yeah, okay. Let It Bleed, I think isn't quite as good as the other three.
I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's lauded, isn't it? But it doesn't quite stand up to the weight of its own.
No, and it happens to kind of form this run. But yeah, I mean, if I was to put them in order, I'd have to put Exile top, even though Sticky Fingers is better, really. And then Sticky Fingers would have to be second, and then it would be Beggars, and Let It Bleed definitely would be fourth.
Yeah.
But having said that, I would probably cram Black and Blue, Some Girls, Bigger Bang would all be they'd all be jostling for the top five.
Right. What's the best live album? Because I've only had Love You live, and that is mixed voices shot.
Get your yayas out by far. I mean, there have been copious numbers of live albums and bootlegs, which are not really bootlegs, released in the last 10, 15 years. So I'm not in favour of everything. But in terms of the classic live albums, Get Your Yayas is the only one that's really essential. It sounds pretty raw. It's when Mick Taylor's at his peak.
Okay.
It's probably the rockiest they got.
Sure. Okay.
Well, that was a real guilty pleasure. Let's move onwards and upwards, and I promise to bring something a little bit more highbrow and rewarding next time. Blame the Hackney Diamonds for dragging this one out the rough. What are you going to inflict on me next, Dave?
Well, possibly as a reaction to this guilty pleasure, we're going to do some rock with people that would very much trying to say more than it's just girls in it. New Model Army and their album Impurity, which you could make an argument. The two big New Model Army's albums, I think, are Thunder and Constellation and Impurity, and you could argue that Thunder and Constellation is their Exile on Main Street, and Impurity is their Sticky Fingers. So I went for the tighter, more slightly concise one. which will surprise a lot of people because if you're a New Model Army fan, you definitely go Thunder and Consolation. That is their big, famous double album. But I've always preferred an album called Impurity, and I commend it to you as brilliant, hooky, intelligent rock, and I will be very interested to see what you think of it.
Well, I look forward to hearing you tell me all that again next week.
Thanks, everybody! Bye!
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, no, not you again.
Fucking up my life.
Oh, that was quite fun.